Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Queerness Diaries. So today I'm joined by Charlie Alfarah, all the way from Chicago. So how are you today, Charlie?
I'm doing well, doing well. Thanks for having me. Appreciate the time we're going to spend today.
Yeah, super happy to have you on. And you're, like I said before, your super cool backdrop with the NASA backgrounds and everything.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, I love NASA. Definitely going to be part of the story today.
Yeah, awesome. And yeah, so I'm so happy to have you on. And so I think today it's be really great to hear your story and, go through all the chapters of your queerness diary, everything that's led you to where you are today and, working with diversity, equality, and inclusion and sort of the story and different roads that you've been on throughout. We always go on so many different paths in life and everything that's led you to where you are today. So, just so everyone can kind of get to know you, if you can just sort of introduce what you're doing at the moment. And so, yeah, like an introduction to yourself.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, again, thanks for having me. My name is Charlie Alfarah. I use he, they pronouns. I identify as non-binary and gay. And I professionally sit under the DEI department at a major tech company. I've been here for about almost 3 years, about 2 weeks out from 3 years. So, of course, the journey has been a bumpy one to get to this point, but I'm finally at the point where I found a passion that has become my job, and it doesn't feel like a job anymore. So, really excited to be here and really excited to be at this point in my life.
Oh, that's super awesome. I think that's the most important thing, isn't it? Once you've found something you love doing and it becomes something that you're passionate about, it doesn't feel like a job then. You find general like enjoyment and fulfillment because you're doing something that's not only helpful for other people, but also you feel fulfilled at the end of the day rather than drained. But it can be a draining process getting to that point sometimes.
It can be, it definitely can, yes.
Yeah, it's but no, that's super awesome. And so what I thought we'd do to start is kind of go all the way back to your early years, so through to your childhood. And so yeah, if you could talk us through like your experience growing up. And I always say to go back to sort of from your first memories up until, teenage years, sort of your life experience and how it was.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. So I'm actually a first generation immigrant. My family moved to the States way back when, back in 1990, before I was born, and they left the Middle East and came here. My dad had the opportunity to study in Chicago, actually prior to getting married and meeting the family, and so America has always been kind of top of the list and the
Yeah.
land of opportunities, and so my family definitely went down that path and ended up kind of uprooting their life back in the Middle East in Jordan and
Yeah.
bringing my family out here. And so I was actually born in Chicago back quite some time. I don't want to age myself too much, but it's been a while since I was born in Chicago. But actually, right after I was born, I was actually born with an intestinal blockage. And so right away from birth, I had to go into surgery on my second day of being
Yeah.
on Earth. And luckily, the surgery was successful and with no major hiccups. So it was nice to, it's nice as a parent, right, to know that your child is safe. But
Yeah.
spent some time, in the hospital as I recovered, but was able to make it home after about a month or so. So
Yeah.
right from the get-go, a little bit of a bumpy start, for my family for sure. But I was born in Chicago, and shortly after we moved to Minnesota, actually when I was just a couple months old. So fresh out of the hospital, and we moved states. So my family is definitely what you might call nomads, where we like
Yeah.
to keep things moving and not stay in one place for too long. But
Yeah.
being born and raised in different places definitely kind of sets the tone for especially as an immigrant, as to where you set your roots and
Yeah.
where home becomes. And so kind of the concept of home was very abstract to me because we did
Mm.
move quite a bit, and knowing that my roots were definitely not from where I was a challenge. So we moved to Minnesota, and I grew up in a pretty affluent white neighborhood within Minnesota, and
Yeah.
Minnesota is not known for being the most diverse, but they definitely have people from all over the world. And so growing up, I went to a school that was primarily white, where
Yeah.
people weren't even aware of what the Middle East was. And so uh, you know kind of being othered from day one was something that kind of
Mm.
came to me. And I didn't really notice it to start with. As a young child, you don't really pick up
Yeah.
on those social cues. And it wasn't until I was in the fourth grade, actually, when 9/11 happened. And
Yeah.
that was the time that it really hit me that I was different from so many other people. And my family sat me down that day. I still remember
Yeah.
we got sent home from school early without any information. And so we were all so young that the school wasn't
Yeah.
comfortable really sharing what was going on, but they sent us home for the day, and we had the opportunity to catch up on the news and catch up with family. And when I got home that day, my parents had to sit me and my sister down and kind of talk us through what just happened and what the implications of those were.
Yeah.
And so, it was actually my first day at a new school, my first week at a new school, excuse me, when 9/11 happened. And so we had just moved again, and I was in a
Mm.
new environment that I was already, feeling a little weary about because it was a new school. I was pretty
Yeah.
young, and I had at that point had only gone to one school. So this was my second school in fourth grade. Excuse me. And we were doing kind of the typical first day of school stuff where everyone had an opportunity to introduce themselves. And prior to 9/11, I knew that I was Middle Eastern, and I was very proud of it. And so I went into school, and I shared that with people. And most of it, they weren't really aware of the Middle East. And so it was kind of a learning opportunity for them. But at the same time, I accidentally exposed myself as being Middle Eastern right before 9/11 happened. And so we definitely saw, we were getting told, don't speak Arabic at school. Try not to
Yeah.
let people know that you're from the Middle East. And of course, this had come right after I had just announced to my whole class that I was. And
Yeah.
so it was kind of no escaping it. And that's kind of the key moments of really at pre-adolescence for me.
Yeah, and I can imagine as well, it must be quite a daunting feeling when you've been so open and proudly yourself, and then all that happens, and it's like suddenly you're told, okay, you have to suppress this part of yourself, and everything you've ever known before, it kind of suddenly changes. And learning to navigate that as well as a young kid, it's one of those things that you sort of go with at the time, but later on, when you play it back, like in your head, you're like, damn, that was really tough to go through, I imagine.
Right, right. And it's like as a kid, you don't realize how impactful things can be around your world. And
Yeah,
I think as a millennial, one of the things that I keep realizing is we're one of the generations that have seen the most historic events happen within
yeah,
within the world. And we keep seeing these world record breaking events or these unprecedented times. And it really started then, back in 9/11 for me at least, where it's like, okay, history has occurred, and you're a part of a huge part of history. And as a 9, 10 year
yeah.
old, you're not really conscious of what that means. But looking back now, it's definitely a big time of life.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, especially, at that age, we really start to get shaped by the environment around us and what's going on. And so things that seem so small or insignificant at the time can replay in our minds years later. And
Right.
certain comments from school or things at home that we sort of keep going through. Suddenly, we're like years later, and a comment or something comes back in our mind, and it's suddenly very significant then. But at the time, we don't realize, as those years are sort of molding us, how much of an impact it has.
Right, right, exactly. It really sets the course for your life, and it's, hindsight is 2020. Looking back,
Yeah,
you always see how clear everything is, but during the time, it's, you just go day by day and hope for the best. And as a child, that was the best that I could do, is just
yeah,
that everything would resolve. And of course, 20 years later, the war ends, and we're
yeah.
just now coming off of what that war started, or what that event started. And so, life really takes a turn sometimes. It just takes
Yeah.
stepping back and really looking at what happened and reflecting on it.
Yeah, it's so true. And so I always get confused in the US. So, because in the UK, we call it primary school until age 11, and then we go to secondary school until 16. Is it the same over there? So, did you stay in the same school through your teenage years, or did you move to a different school
Yeah.
from after the fourth grade? I always get confused with the school
No
system in the
problem.
US.
It's very different. We call it all different names. So it sounds like primary school is pretty similar. So we usually go to school until about 11 or 12
Yeah.
what we call elementary school. Um, and then from there, we spend 3 years in middle school, which I think would be like secondary.
Yeah.
But then from there, we go into high school. So that's right around 14, 15 up until 18. And
Okay.
so, I've because we moved so much, I
Yeah.
did two elementary schools, one middle school, and three high schools. So
Wow.
I moved quite a bit. Yeah,
Yes. And that
yeah.
was all in Minnesota as well.
Most of it was in Minnesota up until we actually moved to Chicago. We moved back to Chicago when I was 15. So I did two schools out in Chicago. Yeah.
Nice. And
Mhm.
how was sort of the experience though, as you were sort of going through your teenage years and finding yourself, but also kind of moving a lot location wise and with the school system? How was it sort of going through? Because those are sort of the very monumental years as well, going through the early teen years and starting to find, aspects of yourself. But I imagine it must have been quite challenging as well when you're moving schools a lot and well,
Yeah.
but you get like exciting as well, I imagine, in some ways, because you get to experience,
Right.
different places. And if you're not too fond of a school, then you get to experience a new school as well.
Right, right. And that's exactly what happened. It's I had the chance basically to reinvent myself every time we moved, because
Yeah,
school, especially when you're at that age, like school is your entire life. There's nothing really beyond that. And so, your personal identity is built in those environments. And so every couple of years, I really had the chance not only to reinvent myself, but to kind of reflect on some of the choices that I made, or some of the people that I hung out with, or something of that sort, where it
yeah,
had a larger impact. Again, you don't see it at the time, it comes back and
yeah,
potentially could haunt you. And so I had the chance really to reinvent myself, and it was challenging. It was definitely challenging, but it gave me the opportunity to get comfortable with unlearning things, which I
yeah,
think not a lot of people have the opportunity to really learn how to unlearn. Because by
yeah,
moving so many different times, I was exposed not only to different groups of people, but to different cultures too.
yeah,
And being able to learn more about other cultures, I think especially in the U.S., it's not as common for people to travel and really expose themselves
yeah,
beyond the U.S. And so having that opportunity really did kind of now looking back, it was the prime placement to kind of put me down on this road. It's
Yeah.
my lived experiences and my exposure to so many different types of people, definitely helped me at where I'm at now. So
Yeah.
lots of feelings around it, but it was nice to be able to from moving from Minnesota back to Chicago, to be able to be part of a community or even a school where Middle Easterners were represented to a greater degree, was definitely something that I found interesting and comforting. And I'm also coming from the Middle East. The Middle East is typically an Islamic state and lives by
Yeah.
Islamic rules, but my family uh, was not Islamic. We were Christian, so we were
Yeah.
minority from the get-go. Basically, back home, we were a minority, and then coming here, we were a minority. And so, exposing myself to the Middle Eastern community that wasn't when within Chicago, I still found myself almost as an outsider because of my religious background. And so, luckily I found some friends that were open enough to accept me as kind of part of their group, and
Yeah.
had a looking back, high school is always tough.
Yeah.
High school is always a time period of your life where you're really defining yourself and kind of figuring out your future and getting ready for college. But with all those things aside, overall, it was a pretty positive experience for sure.
Yeah. And I think as well, like with our generation, with the first generation as well, and at the time of finding ourselves, it's sort of when social media really started to boom with
Right.
MySpace, good old MySpace. I still remember using the
Yeah.
songs and layouts and
Yeah.
everything. And so it was the first sort of era of really being able to carve out an online identity. But as a teenager, often it's like, well, I don't know what my identity is. And it's like, am
Right.
I trying to fit in with a certain crowd? And, I remember I used to be like, even down to the song choice on my MySpace or things like that in school, like things now which seem so ridiculous. But back in those, yeah, MySpace and then Facebook days, like getting that identity. And I'm not sure if it was the same for you. I was like trying to maybe wear many different hats at the same time because I couldn't really be fully out in my hometown or at home, but I wanted to be with my friends and at college, which starts at it's like from 16 to 18 in the UK.
Mm.
So I'm not sure if you had a similar experience, like with sort of in terms of the coming out process and navigating it with friendships and family. How did that go with your family and also with friendships?
Yeah. Yeah. So, it all kind of started right around, I want to say maybe when I was like 10 or 11, when I started to realize that my sexuality was definitely different from the norm.
Yeah,
Uh, and between that age, around like 9 or 10 or 11, up until I was 24, I kind of sat in denial.
yeah,
And coming from growing up in Minnesota was a very conservative neighborhood and a very conservative culture, and then coming from a Christian religious background as well, and then
yeah,
being removed from that, and my parents did their best, to try to keep some of the kind of homeland traditions and culture within
yeah,
the way that we grew up. And part of that was, of course, having an opinion on the LGBTQ community. And Minnesota is one of the states within the U.S. It's one of the top states where LGBTQ people live, and so it
yeah,
wasn't a lack of exposure; it was just a lack of acceptance. And I spent those 14 years of my life really almost fighting my sexuality and trying my best to fit in the communities that I spent so much time trying to fit in with. Um,
yeah,
and it's when you're in your teenage years, feeling lonely is one of the easiest ways to,
yeah,
end up in a negative state. And it's so easy because, you're at a school with all these different people, and if you don't have people that accept you,
Yeah.
you just feel alone within a huge crowd. And so, fighting that balance of, am I coming out to the people around me at the risk of losing a sense of community? And
Yeah.
uh, it took until my adult years for me to finally be able to see the weight of having a community that is not accepting and having a community that is. And so at 24, I started kind of my journey of coming out. And I say journey because it's one of those things that's it's never ending.
Yeah. Yeah.
New, every new environment you're in, it's like you have to come out again. And so I started my journey at 24, and started coming out to some of my close friends. And
Yeah.
uh, I was lucky enough to have friends that were accepting, but at the same time I had friends that couldn't handle it. And so I lost some of my friends at that point, and started to shift my priorities more so on myself than on those around me. And when I started to realize that my well-being was in my own hands and not in the hands of others, life really took a turn. And so
Yeah.
started coming out at 24. And with family, I waited even longer. I waited a couple more years. And when I did come out, it was a very difficult time, because it was
Yeah.
it was one of those things that just isn't talked about, is hidden, is put to the side.
Yeah.
So my family being, um, we're from the Middle East, where individualism is not really a thing. It's more focused on collectivism, and
Yeah.
that sense of community is so ingrained in the culture, that was one of the first things that my family struggled with, is how do we stay within our community if we're if I'm part of the community, of the LGBTQ community. And so, lots of feelings around that. And that's still something that is a challenge to this day, and something that the family's still working through. But at some
Yeah.
point, you have to, I don't want to say you have to grow up, but you have to kind of get in that mindset that you're responsible for your own happiness, and building
Yes.
the
So true.
world around you, to create that environment that you can thrive in, is so important. And so,
Yeah.
unfortunately, some people were lost in this journey, but stronger friendships were even formed. So
Yeah.
definitely a pro and cons, to living within the community.
Yeah, I think, yeah, that's one of the things that's so difficult to navigate because we feel like this sense that it's almost like we don't want to burst the bubble because we know it's gonna, not be received well by some people. But the longer we put it off, the more we're losing our sense of self and the more it starts to become this burden and weigh us down. So we want to be open to everyone, but we feel like once the ball starts rolling, it never stops. It's like
Right.
you got to tell another person and then another, and then it's like I just want to be. You have those moments where you just want to scream and be like, I just want to be me, like without having to tell and make it a big announcement to everyone.
Right. Right. It becomes this burden that really is detrimental to your mental health. And it's something that there I know of people that stayed in the closet almost their entire lives. It wasn't
Yeah,
until like their last moments that they came out. And it's such a heavy weight, that once you do start to come out, you start feeling that weight lift off of your shoulders, and you really
yeah,
start to see the world kind of with a brighter lens. Everything feels a little bit more light and airy, and
yeah,
bright and exciting. And um, it's overcoming that burden of coming out the first time is so hard, but it is,
yeah,
to me, it's so worth it, because you
yeah,
really you really don't find yourself until you learn to accept yourself. And I think
yeah,
that learning to accept yourself is so important, especially with the focus of society now on mental health. I think finally it's starting to get the attention that it deserves, and
yeah, for
the
sure.
appropriate resources are being allocated. But there's personal accountability when it comes to your mental well-being, and you have to step up to the plate for yourself. You really have
Yeah,
to do it for yourself.
yeah, 100%. I think there's been like a really big shift in like talk about mental health over the last few years. And It's like through generations as well, like the same way, like for example, through my family, like everything in the past would be swept under the rug from mental health to sexuality, like was
Right.
just not spoken about.
Right.
And like when we look back now, because me and my mom often talk about it, like we can identify different traits that have passed down through generations, but it was never spoken about. It was like
Mm.
people knew, but no one would open their mouth to talk about it. And yeah, I guess me and my mom sort of developed, and with my sister as well, this relationship. Once I moved to Spain, and I was like, because I couldn't do it when I was at home, I was very much shut down and living in fear of being outed. Even though I came out at 17, I went back into the closet, and I had this fear like of being outed in work or people, I don't know, telling my parents, even though they knew that it just had all been swept under the carpet, that when I was in Spain, I started approaching things a different way. And then it rolled into mental health as well, being able to talk about that because I grew up as like this person that would put on a happy face, go to work, everything's all good. But the reality was not like that, you know, it was a
Right.
roller coaster of emotions. And
Mhm.
especially when you move to a different place where you can fully be yourself and you're not really sure who you are, it's like overwhelming that sort of experience. Like, okay, how do I navigate the working world and everything as myself? Um, so it's one of those things, even like I was 25 when I moved to Madrid, but yeah, even through mid to late 20s, it was a process and it's still a process even now for me, I think.
Right. Right. And it you would think it gets easier, but it
Yeah.
gets worse every time because it's you start to once you start seeing the people in your life drop off, people that you love,
Yeah.
because of something that you don't have any control over.
Yeah.
It's a traumatic experience, and I think we don't talk enough about the trauma of coming out, right? Because
Yeah.
there's so much that hangs on the line. And then, like you said, with Western cultures, right? Like speaking about these taboo topics is just not an option. It's we
Yeah.
don't talk about it, you be who you are, but don't tell anyone.
Yeah.
Let's protect the image of our legacy, and it's detrimental in the sense that you have to mask a part of your identity
Yeah.
while knowing that this isn't something that is way out of the ordinary. This is something that is pretty normal, and
Yeah.
we see homosexuality across the globe, with humans, with animals, with different species, and it's not something that we talk about enough because it's not
Yeah.
we're not quite there yet. And I think a lot of the protests and the continued activism in the
Yeah.
space is so important because until it becomes normalized enough that we can talk about it without hurting each other's feelings, I think it's going to be it's a it's a it's the light at the end of the tunnel to look forward to for sure.
Yeah. It's so true. And I think for a lot of us as well, growing up, like when we look back at sort of monumental moments in our life, like things that should be not a big deal at all, a big like monumental moments, like the moment we come out, the first kiss, like the first feeling of being sort of free and the first feeling of being open. And these things should be normalized, but for us, they are such big moments of our lives that we never forget. And yeah, it's like one of those things. It's like we always will remember people's reactions when we came out to them, people's reactions, you know, when we were like, look, this is me, accept it or don't.
Right.
and and yeah, it's one of those things that just always sticks in your head, I think.
It does. And I think the trauma behind it really kind of solidifies the memory, right? Because you're
Yeah.
so emotionally charged in that moment, and your
Yeah.
body really takes that into consideration, and it kind of burns that into your memory, and it makes it
Yeah.
stick there, right? Because we're not built to deal with trauma after trauma after trauma, and yet
Yeah.
here we are being traumatized left and right,
I,
and our brains aren't adapted to that. And it's not something where I'm jealous of the straight community, but there's it's worth acknowledging that coming out as a straight person, coming out versus coming out as a gay person or as part of the LGBTQ community, such a different experience, right?
yeah.
Saying I'm normal and then saying I'm different because of XYZ really has an impact on the way it kind of settles in your brain. And I think we have these visceral reactions, right? And we get in
Yeah.
these situations where our stomachs start turning or our brains start racing,
Oh
and we
yeah,
can't
100%.
settle down because our bodies know this environment and knows the unknown kind of factor as being too scary. And so we kind of sit with this trauma, whether or not we like it, and we have to
Yeah.
deal with it on the day to day. And I think that's something worth acknowledging, because it's definitely a unique experience to be kind of stuck in that fight or flight mode throughout
Yeah.
a lot of your experience. And new environments, like we talked before, starting a new job, you have to come out again, and it's
Yeah.
like it's already nerve-wracking to start a new job just because it's a new job, right? It's like all of these extra stressors are just part of the experience because it's not normalized just yet. So lots of work to be done on the mental health front, and really
Yeah.
kind of acknowledging and accepting the experiences of the LGBTQ community. And I'm hopeful that we'll see a day where
Yeah.
homosexuality isn't punishable by death
Yeah.
around the world. It's unfortunate that there are still some environments where you can't live your life. You're not allowed to because of who you are.
Yeah, I know. And it's a tough one. And I think with the workplace as well, like I'm not sure your sort of experience, but it's something I've gotten more comfortable with as time has gone on. It used to be like in my hometown, the biggest kept secret. Like I would not tell anyone. And I've always been the type of person that's kept my work, home life quite separate from each other until this past year or so, I guess I've gotten more comfortable with it. But how was it for you, sort of your path to as you went through these working situations and now ending up, working in diversity, equality, and inclusion? What sort of lit that sort of fire to really get involved in that? And how was the process through sort of being able to be your authentic self in the workplace? And was it challenging at first or something that naturally evolved over time?
Yeah, it took me a while to
Yeah.
to accept the fact that I can allow myself to come out at work. Um, growing up when I was in high school, I got my first job when I was 14.
Yeah.
I was bagging groceries. I was part of a family who, we weren't wealthy, to say the least. We went through definitely some financial challenges, and so work wasn't only in like an after school activity. It was the difference between living in a home that had a roof and not living at home and being on the streets. And so I definitely took coming out at work very seriously, because I knew the
Yeah.
potential consequences of coming out could be severe. And
Yeah.
so I held on to my sexuality, and I kept it very much like you. I kept my personal and my work life very separate.
Yeah.
And now looking back, I realize that that is a response to the trauma.
Yeah.
It's not normal to be living that type of way. And I'm sure as you are kind of becoming more comfortable with meshing the two, you do feel a lot more free now that you're at that
Yeah.
point. And so I was fortunate when I started this job. I started it with the mindset right away of I'm gonna bring my authentic self. If it
Yeah.
works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And I think that being able to have that type of stance is a privilege in itself, because I
yeah,
could risk losing my job. I can risk my manager hating me, or not being comfortable with me, because I was at a point finally in my life where I was financially secure. And so there were a lot of factors that really went into being comfortable at work. And once I released that off of my chest, it was it was so
yeah,
freeing because I could start combining all parts of my life and bringing every part of me that I wanted to
yeah,
show up. I was able to do that. And so the journey was definitely a long one, from
yeah,
14 all the way to, gosh, I was like 28, 29 when I started this job. And so it's
yeah,
very, very revealing. But the first time I came out, it was back when I was teaching, actually. So I used to teach high school. So between the ages like 14 to 18, I taught those students, and
yeah,
uh, I taught the sciences. And so, my love for STEM has been since I was a little kid. And
yeah,
uh, I've got ADHD too as well, like we've talked about. Part
yeah,
of kind of the hyper focus of ADHD when you get really into stuff,
yeah,
it was space.
yeah,
And it was just like this kind of escape for me, from reality. I was able to escape and kind of look up into the stars and just know that, like, we're just a speck of dust in a whole
yeah,
universe of existence, and realizing kind of how small we were compared to the rest of existence was just, it's humbling to realize that. And so
yeah,
I think my passion for space has just been fueled by just a bunch of different things. But one of the big things was when I lost my father. I was 19, and I have family scattered all around the world. And one thing that brought me comfort at the end of the day was looking up at the moon and just knowing in the back of my mind that this is the same moon that everyone on this planet sees.
yeah,
And this is the one kind of thread between all of the diversity of life.
yeah,
We all share the same moon. And it's like, to me, that was just it was grounding to be able to realize that. And so I found a lot of comfort as I was kind of struggling with coming out, through STEM and through all of that. But when I was
yeah,
teaching, it was I developed this new kind of sense of responsibility to these children,
yeah,
and showing up in an inauthentic way to these children. I
yeah,
think children are very, very observant and very receptive, and
yes,
they can tell whether or not you're being honest or whether or not you're hiding
mm,
something. And it was seeing the kids that I could tell were struggling with their sexuality that really forced me to be comfortable with myself. And so I came out at work, and I had the opportunity to start what we call the Gender and Sexuality Alliance,
yeah,
previously known as like GSA, or
yeah,
Gay Straight Alliance. And so I started the school's first ever GSA. And while I wasn't teaching for too long, it was definitely an experience to know that, at that age, I needed it. I
yeah,
needed a GSA. I needed that type of community, and to be able to provide that. When I went into teaching, there was a quote that really stuck with me, and it was, be who you needed when you were younger. Uh,
yeah,
and I really took that to heart, and I knew that there were students struggling with their sexuality and how heavy that can be. And so I wanted to create a space, and I knew I couldn't do that until I was fully accepting of myself. And so it was really a journey of learning to accept myself for the sake of supporting these children that were,
yeah,
I say children, but they were grown adults. I think the
yeah,
LGBTQ community, like, we're forced to grow up so quickly. We're
yeah, it's so
forced
true.
to look at the world with a cynical lens.
Yeah,
And we can't exist without that lens. And that lens sticks forever, and it becomes more of a challenge as you get older to kind of break through that cynical perspective. And so there was quite a bit that went into it, but
Yeah.
coming to the point that I'm at now, the my range of happiness has increased because I can be happier than I've ever was before.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I can feel those negative emotions even more intense than I used to. And so just being authentic with myself was just so critical for my own well-being that it needed to happen. And there was no excuse that was strong enough to hold me back from coming out. And
Keeping our voices and as a community, connecting with each other. And I think, yeah, through social media, LinkedIn, things like Meetup, there's so many initiatives and groups now to connect with each other. So it's definitely helped, especially post-COVID with that horrible isolating time,
Mhm.
to come back into the world and be able to connect with so many people.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it really the introduction of social media, there's definitely arguments to both sides, but I think overall it's really brought a sense of acceptance for people, especially in areas of the world where
Yeah.
it's less accepting. I think the community at a large, ask any gay person in a very rural area, one of their
Yeah.
dreams is to move to a city, a big city,
Yeah.
because that's where you find the acceptance. And it's hard because you can't blame a society for holding on to their traditions and to their culture because it's a
Yeah.
defining thing to be part of a region of the world and have that culture. And so we can't expect people to abandon everything they've known to love and believe overnight. And so it's a continued progress forward. But I think as as society becomes more connected and there's less of an opportunity to be able to kind of hide under the rock per se and
Yeah.
miss out on the world, it's moving us towards a better society as a whole, as a whole world, really.
Yeah, it's so true. And I think as well, what you do on LinkedIn in terms of your posts about ADHD in the workplace and really positive, uplifting posts, like, is so great as well and so important because, it's one of those things that there needs to be more awareness of. Like, it's one of those things that we still have to push a lot, and
Mhm.
eventually we all find the right job, the right workplace for us. But it
Yeah.
can be as well another sort of thing, like I said before, it can feel like a secondary rejection for a lot of people in the workplace. So I think what you do with your post on LinkedIn is really great, and getting that initiative out there and saying so many positive reinforcements about ADHD and navigating the workplace.
Yeah, yeah, thank you for that. I think our next step as a society to continue to move forward is to have these uncomfortable conversations and to
Yeah.
continue to kind of push ourselves towards a more accepting world and having these conversations. And this is why I try to bring that to LinkedIn. It's having
Yeah.
these conversations with people who have an impact on someone else's life, right? Like
Yeah.
being in leadership, you have such a responsibility to the people that you're leading, and it's important to be able to pull on experiences. They don't have to be your own, but to
Yeah.
know to take a moment to step outside of your own shoes and into that of someone else's is such
Yeah.
it's such an eye-opening experience. And so I try to share as much as possible on these social platforms to get people involved in these conversations and to let them know that there are people in your world, whether you see it or not, that are different from you. And those
Yeah.
differences shouldn't be shunned and put to the side. They should be highlighted. They should be brought to the forefront because I think that's where society as a whole will thrive, is when we're able to bring our uniqueness rather than being
Yeah.
stuck and trying to fit in and become the norm. I think
Yeah,
we
for
need to
sure.
embrace our differences, and I think the research tells it all. Companies that
Yeah.
are more diverse are moving in the right direction. Their profits are going up, their innovation, their
Yeah.
creativity. It all has an impact on on the overall business, and it's hard to kind of pinpoint and look at, for example, your ledger and say, diversity, equity, inclusion netted us this many dollars. It doesn't work like that, and
Yeah,
so
yeah,
it's tough sometimes, and we're seeing it very much so now, especially in the US, where DE&I is being politicized and being attacked. And I think both sides think that they have a good reason, but I think
mm,
the research behind it still needs to be developed and properly communicated. I think there's
yeah, for
there's
sure.
there's enough data out there to support the creation and the continuation of D&I, but I
Yeah,
think we're not doing the best job in communicating that value to external kind of stakeholders, for example. So
yeah.
lots of work to be done, but it's nice. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think, in opening the conversations and in continuing to post and, raise the awareness out there, like even I always think, even if it reaches just one or two people, and it can make such a big difference to them. So it's carry on forward with that initiative. And I think, yeah, what you do is so great for the community. And it's one of those things we've got to just, keep the fire going. And
Right.
so it was super awesome to have you on the podcast today. And so just so people know, where can they find you on socials? And yeah, and like I said, definitely check out Charlie's articles on ADHD and his posts on LinkedIn, because there's so many which are really informative and really important.
Thank
And
you.
so, yeah, so where can people find you if they want to sort of reach out and talk more about some information?
Absolutely. So LinkedIn is my primary social platform right now. So Charlie Alfarah on LinkedIn, definitely connect with me, and thank you for having me and for highlighting the work that I'm doing. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming on, and yeah, with your awesome background, the NASA collection. And so, yeah, thanks so much. And to all my guests as well, thank you for tuning in this week to the Queerness Diaries. We'll be back next week with another episode. So, thank you very much. And thank you, Charlie.
Thank you. Yeah.
Right.